Coming up next on Arizona Horizon, it's the Journalists Roundtable. We'll look at the week's top stories, including the Attorney General filing criminal charges against a prediction market platform. The Journalists Roundtable is next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your public television station.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. It's Friday, and that means it's time for the Journalists Roundtable. And joining us tonight, Jeremy Duda from Axios Phoenix, Mark Brody from KJZZ Radio, and Jessica Boehm, also from Axios Phoenix. Panel, good to have you all here. Thank you so much for joining us. Jeremy, I'm going to start with you. We'll start with the Attorney General going after Kalshi. What is this? What is a prediction market, for goodness sakes? We're all learning on the fly here.
Well, a prediction market, as you think of the sports wagering websites where you can go on and bet on who's going to be in the Final Four or win the World Series, this is a website like that, only you can bet on anything. You can bet on whether the United States is going to attack Cuba. You can bet on whether certain legislation is going to be passed. You can bet on, to the Attorney General's dismay, you can bet on Arizona elections. And they take bets from all over the country, all over the world on these things. And Attorney General Kris Mayes has a bit of a problem with that. And she has filed 20 misdemeanor criminal charges against this website, which is, I believe, first in the country. These are very controversial. A lot of states are grappling with how to regulate these. And Kris Mayes kind of took it up a notch and said, we're taking you to court over some criminal charges.
And Mark, it sounds like obviously there's gambling aspects here in state law, but also the idea of wagering, as Jerry mentioned, wagering or even putting any, a contract or whatever they call that on elections, that's against state law.
Well, for sure, it's against Arizona law to bet on elections. There's also the issue of the state's gaming compacts and the laws associated with that, and whether this platform is in violation of that. There's also, in addition to the legal questions, there are just some sort of like moral, ethical questions, to Jeremy's point, like should people be betting on whether we're going to bomb another country, or if, some kind of political violence or something else might kick off. There's something different between voting on, betting on whether, it'll be too cloudy to see the sunset, or what the weather is going to be, if it's going to hit 110 degrees or something, versus, if we're going to go to war.
Yeah, and Jessica, it sounds as though Kalshi is saying, that's all fine and dandy for state law, but we're not a state entity. We deal nationally, and so there's no federal law. Am I getting this right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so, as Jeremy alluded to, states have tried to regulate these things. And what these groups have said is, we are regulated by the federal government. I think it's Futures, Commodities, and Trading Commission, and to their credit, the Trump administration has sided with them and said, yeah, this is our entity. You don't have the right to regulate us. So what's interesting here is that, as opposed to trying to pass a law to regulate, the Attorney General has charged this entity criminal charges. And what this is probably going to lead to is probably eventually a Supreme Court case where we finally decide, is this betting, or is this a contract and an investment opportunity? Well,
and that's a really good point, Jerry. What's the difference between a contract, an investment opportunity, and straight-on gambling?
If you or I are sitting there on our phone putting bets on one of these elections or something, not really much of a difference there. Legally, there may be a distinction. I think we're probably going to find that out pretty soon when this goes to court, along with, questions, as Jessica mentioned, about who has the authority to regulate this. This was kind of, I think the Attorney General's hand was kind of a little bit forced here, or they may have felt a little bit forced, because Kalshi went to court against Arizona, because the Arizona Department of Gaming in December, I believe, sent a cease and desist letter to Kalshi, and I think probably to Polymarket, which is another website, another predictions market that is not facing criminal charges here, a cease and desist letter saying that they're violating state law on the online wagering. So they wanted to get, I think, kind of a preemptive ruling before any action it could be taking. Now, the state has taken action of its own. So we're going to sort this out in court, federal, state, or both.
Yeah, and thus, Mark, the first state to file suit against this.
Yeah, it'll be super interesting, and probably in some ways at least precedent setting what the courts here do on this. Although, it's interesting to note that different states have different laws related to gaming and gambling. So to the extent that state laws are applicable, to Jessica's point, and I don't know to what extent they are applicable, it might be be different from one state to another, but it will be really interesting to see what the courts say here.
But isn't that Kelsey, that's their argument? We shouldn't be bound by this hodgepodge, this hopscotching around the country with different laws, different state laws.
That's exactly what they're saying. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see if the courts say, well, actually, if you're operating in these states, you need to abide by state laws, or if not.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, Jessica, Larry Sabato is a pretty big election prognosticator. People know him and they understand his predictions. He kind of had Arizona as, for the governor's race, as a toss-up. Not anymore, huh?
Not anymore. We've moved into a lean Democrat, which was, I think, surprising to some, but I think probably speaks a lot to the state of the nation right now. We are still at a point where people are looking at what's happening from the White House, and now you see with the war in Iran, prices going up and everything else, and that's really creating a situation where people are not super thrilled with the state of the country, and they're taking that out directly in their opinions at this point on these lower level races like the governor's race in Arizona.
And Mark, is that the big push here, the idea that Democrats are just simply more motivated right now?
I mean, we've certainly seen that in other primaries and other elections that we, both last year and so far this year, where Democratic turnout, I think in the Texas U.S. Senate race, Democratic turnout was higher than it's been in quite some time. So there certainly is a lot of motivation. I think it's also worth noting that it's still a really long way away from the election. And the Republicans don't have their nominee official yet, and a lot can change between now and November.
The fact that the Republicans don't have their nominee means that the two Republicans are starting to fight a little bit here. I think David Schweikert's kind of coming out against Andy Biggs, basically saying, Congressman Schweikert, Congressman Biggs, basically saying Biggs is a little too radical, a little too much for the state. I mean, if they start fighting, I can see where someone might say, hey, that helps the other side.
Sure, and then there's folks who feel like if Biggs being the nominee would help Hobbs, because he's certainly further to the right. I think Kelsey has him at over 90% odds, by the way, to win the primary, and I think the Democrats at about 71% to win the governor's race. But yeah, Biggs has been the front runner for a long time in that primary, regardless of whether his opponent is Karen Taylor Robson, who's no longer in the race, or David Schweikert. Schweikert's starting to throw some punches. He's been known to throw some punches in his campaigns in the past, and I think at this point that is kind of what you have to do if you're on the outside looking in that primary. Is you have to start taking some swipes at the front runner, and that's what you're starting to see happen now. I think you'll probably start to see it a lot more in the not too distant future.
And Jessica, I think Sabato, or one of these election prognosticators, was saying because there's no Senate race in Arizona, we have a lot of statewide races, but no Senate race, the national mood, the national picture will play even more so on the governor's race, and they are seeing that discontent with Trump is a factor here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's not only going to, at least at this point, it hasn't only played out in other elections across the country with Democrats being more fired up, but it's also played out with, moderates or independents or no party designateds leaning more towards the left as kind of an affront to Trump.
And you have to keep in mind that Trump is such a turnout motivator for his base, and you've seen that in 3 consecutive presidential elections. But if he's not on the ballot, a lot of those folks simply aren't going to come out. And remember in 2018, the economy was going great, things were looking up, and the Republicans still got creamed in that primary or in that midterm election because folks were not happy with Trump. Things are not looking nearly as good now as they were in 2018.
Yeah.
Well, and also, when you talk about the effect of President Trump, Andy Biggs, assuming he's the nominee, as Kelsey suggesting maybe he will be, he is very tied closely to President Trump. Turning Point is, really, really backing him, and he's a very close ally of the president. So it'll be interesting to see how much that plays less in the primary, but more in the general election.
Well, and I'd imagine a Sabato would probably say something along the lines, well, let's handicap the primary. Biggs probably would win right now, obviously because of the nature of primaries, but that would in turn help a Hobbs.
I mean, that's the conventional wisdom, as Jeremy said, that Governor Hobbs is helped if, it's better for her if Congressman Biggs is the nominee. But, who knows? I mean, the reality is, who knows?
Yeah. Hey, Jessica, who's Cody Rhyme and why is he now in the legislature?
So Joseph Chaplick, who's running for Congressional District 1, has left, and now we have Cody Rhyme, who was selected by the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors this week. He was very active in the Rio Verde water crisis, and now he is a member of our legislature.
And you mentioned the Corporation Commission, the Board of Supervisors here. One supervisor in particular, Thomas Galvin, that kind of covers this region, kind of covers his district. He was very much in support of Cody Rhyme, not very much in support of the other names on the list. Huh?
Yeah, and it's worth noting that one of the names on the list, Michelle Ugenti-Rita, former state senator, ran against Tom Galvin a few years ago. So there's not been much love lost before or after that. So it was unsurprising that he didn't advocate for her. And the other one on the list was George Califf, who the precinct committee members did support.
Yeah.
But Tom Galvin said that this was the right way to go.
Yeah, and we should mention that Michelle Ugenti-Rita told the Arizona Republic that the reason Galvin did not choose her or even give her a questionnaire prior to is that, quote, he is threatened by strong conservative women like myself.
I'm guessing the reason he didn't go with her is because if anyone who watched that campaign where she was the incumbent and she challenged him, it was kind of an ugly race. So I don't think I'm kind of surprised she would even put in for that, given that by tradition, the supervisor whose district covers, the legislative district with the vacancy, they're the ones who get to make that choice, and everyone else traditionally defers to them. So knowing who is going to be making that pick, but it's worth noting that both Cody Rhyme and George Califf, who didn't get the nod, they're both running. They'd previously filed to run for this. There's going to be 2 open seats there, Joseph Chaplick and Alex Culloden, who's running for Secretary of State. So. That certainly helps out Cody Rhyme as he's running for one of those seats, I think.
Does Cody Rhyme change the nature of the legislature in any way, shape, or form?
Not really. I mean, the new legislator had to be from the same party as the one who departed, so it had to be a Republican. And, he's joined the Freedom Caucus, which Joseph Chaplick was also a member of. So other than, being there to vote on what's still to come, including the budget and some other, pretty significant legislation, doesn't change the numbers of, the partisan split, doesn't really change sort of the nature of the caucus, I don't think.
Yeah. No, sticking with you, Mark, it sounds like we had a court hearing this week. Yet again, Republicans and Democrats not happy with it's the Arizona Independent Party.
Yeah, something that the Democrats and Republicans can agree on.
Yes.
They both don't want this party to be called the Arizona Independent Party. This was really interesting because they're both saying, along with the Clean Elections Commission, that the Secretary of State basically overstepped his authority in granting the name change from the No Labels Party to the Arizona Independent Party. Fontes said he didn't have the authority not to grant this request. It kind of sounds like his argument is, what was I supposed to do here? Like, somebody was going to sue me no matter what I chose to do, so I went with making the change. The Democrats and Republicans and the Clean Elections Commission are basically saying it's confusing. A lot of people in this state consider themselves independents, but that's party not designated, not a member of an actual independent party. That's what the courts are going to have to sort out.
I would think it's confusing to everyone involved here. Is there any Arizona law that specifically clarifies what the Secretary of State can and cannot do in such a situation?
There is not, and that was actually one of the points of contention, but also something that they all agreed on. The Secretary of State and the parties suing him are like, yeah, it doesn't specifically say in state law, which is why we're kind of in this situation where, Adrian Fontes says, I thought that I had to, and the other groups say, no, you absolutely should not have, and now the courts have to decide. And I think it's really going to come down more to this name, this specific name, Arizona Independent Party. The judge seemed to indicate that he understood, like you do, that is confusing.
Yeah, called it highly problematic,
yes.
I think.
I think you said bait and switch as well, which probably doesn't bode well for the Independent Party. You asked if there was a law. Not yet, but we could see one soon. The state Senate has passed a bill that would make it legal to use words like independent or unaffiliated or anything, going back to that issue of whether that's confusing to voters who think of no party designated as independent. But the judge is supposed to rule, I think, next week, and they're going to have to figure this out, including appeals, pretty quickly, because the deadline for candidates to submit their nominating petitions is tomorrow. And there are a lot of folks, including a lot who filed in the last few weeks, who have filed to run as Arizona Independent Party candidates. And if that gets overturned, you have to ask, like, can these folks still be on the ballot as no labels? Do they just not get on the ballot at all because voters didn't sign a petition for a no labels candidate?
And what, we had 40 some odd thousand people have already registered for the Arizona Independent Party?
Yeah, and while that is a lot for a party, it is really not that much compared to the number of voters in Arizona who are, I guess, small I independents, right? Not designated with a party. And, this is much more than just sort of an academic conversation. To Jeremy's point, there are candidates that are planning to run on this label, and people who want to get on the ballot have a lot fewer signatures to collect as members of a party than if they were purely small I independent, not with a party. So it could have some serious repercussions for the election.
The repercussions and the timing and the clarification and all of this. I mean, the courts in the past have looked into these kinds of factors and used these as mitigating factors on rulings because, I mean, again, as you mentioned, the time is running out.
Yeah, and we see we see expedited litigation schedules for us because everyone's filing their signatures by tomorrow. You're going to see a lot of challenges trying to kick people off the ballot. Those have to move really quickly. And just like if there's an appeal, whoever loses is obviously going to appeal this next week. That's going to have to move quickly. One other thing you mentioned, 40,000 people registered under this party. Most of those folks had registered under the No Labels Party, which I think was also an issue for the judge and for the attorneys representing the people trying to just saying these people are going to show up and say, hey, that's not my party. I never registered as an Arizona Independent Party voter.
Yeah, you don't need to go to the polls and find out that you're registered to a party you don't recognize. That's not a good thing. Hey, Jessica, we got a couple of ESA reform initiatives out there. A couple of one of them's pretty strongly against ESA or controlling ESA. The other not so strong. Talk to us about this.
Yeah, this is going to be fascinating. So there's obviously the pro-public school group that's pushing a very strong ESA reform that would limit who would be eligible for these school voucher type scholarships. And it would also put pretty serious transparency in effect to make sure that the things that parents are spending this money on is, correct. On the other side, we got another ESA ballot initiative this week that is actually being backed by people who are supportive of school choice. And this is kind of to get ahead of some of the controversy that's been coming out of, there being some pretty serious allegations of misspending. And so this would, go deep on the transparency, making sure money is spent correctly, but it would keep ESAs available to anyone who wants one.
Yeah, I think that second one has, you can only purchase things on a market. They had to develop a marketplace, something along these lines?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an effort to make it more transparent and to make sure that people are not spending their money on things that they ought not to be spending money on. But, one of the big differences is a cap that the public schools group wants to put. I think the income limit is $150,000. If you make more than that, you are not eligible for ESAs. Right now, anybody can get one. And the more recent initiative would keep it that way, that there is no cap, that anybody would still be eligible for it.
And state-approved curriculum would be required for the first one, for the more draconian one, if you will. State-approved curriculum, that would have to be a part of any purchase.
I think there's a curriculum requirement for. There's some curriculum provisions for the other one too, but I think it's probably stricter for the first one. The first one is really meant to crack down on a lot of the abuses, the things that make the headlines, people spending money on jewelry and lingerie and God knows what that has no clear educational purpose. And I think what's interesting is that the new one, the pro ESA one, has in terms of the luxury purchase, has all those same prohibitions. I think it looked like the wording might have actually been word for word the same, more or less, and they're clearly trying to get ahead of a lot of these negative headlines, a lot of the audits that we've seen. People, whether you can argue that there's a small number of folks who are abusing the program, and it probably is a pretty small number, but those really get headlines. Those make a lot of people say, hey, we need to do something about this program. And the American Federation for Children, largest national school choice group in the country, they came out immediately, said we are supporting this. This is going to help preserve the program from the union-backed initiative. They're going to fund this, they tell me. So you can really definitely see this as an attempt to head off this much stronger measure. So if they both get to the ballot, and it's going to be a tall order for both of them given how late in the election season it is, but if they both get onto the ballot, this is going to be a very fascinating, possibly the most fascinating fight on the ballot we'll see this year.
Something that was pointed out to me is that you're going to see a split in the school choice crowd because you have this American Federation for Children, largest school choice group, pushing for it. The Heritage Foundation folks are like, absolutely not. We don't need any of this. So you're going to see a split within school choice groups as to if they support this at all.
Is the split leading to confusion?
Oh, I'm certain it will. But what's more interesting to me is like there's obviously a group of people, the American Federation for Children, that realize, oh, we've got a problem here. And we need to find ways to put transparency into effect, or we're going to lose this altogether. And then there's a whole other argument of, no, this is a small group of people. We're making too much hay out of it, nothing. And we don't think we need any more regulation.
But if you have these two, let's say both initiatives make it. I mean, you know the rule. If too many initiatives, people just vote no.
Well, so there's two really interesting potential aspects at play here. Yes, that if there are two initiatives on the same topic, the conventional wisdom is that voters will vote no on both because it's confusing and trying to find the differences. But there's also the possibility that they both pass, in which case the initiative that gets the most votes is the one that wins. So you could have a situation where both of these are approved by 50% plus one or more, and you have to see which one actually gets the most votes to see which one takes effect.
Yeah, that is possible, is it not, Jeremy?
Oh, very possible. We've seen things like that happen before, where two ballot measures on the same topic pass them. And to Jessica's point, if there are school ESA supporters voting no on it because they don't want any new regulations, that's not going to bode well for that measure if both pass.
So if both fail, then we're back where we are. Then.
We're exactly where we are now.
Yeah, and so yeah.
One other point I think is interesting. If one or both pass, especially if the more moderate one passes. Suppose the Democrats ever achieve their dream of taking the legislature and they wanted to try and add some new restrictions on this. Law this becomes voter protected.
Yes.
A voter protected law cannot be amended by the legislature, so that's something that ESA critics would probably have to worry about.
I was going to say in both sides. If the harsh one. If
the harsher one passes, then the Republicans can't replace Hobbs can come back next year and undo it.
Yeah. Hey, Jessica, Kari Lake lost again. This time, the judge orders 1,000 journalists back to work. These were all put on administrative leave by Lake. This is the Voice of America business?
Yes. So the parent organization of Voice of America that Kari Lake was sort of the CEO of, but that's kind of the problem, is that she wasn't legally able to be. And the judge has now said, hey, she had no authority to do this. So these journalists who've been on leave for a year are now going to be I think by Monday they have to be back to work. Yeah,
the judge called her decision, hasty and ill-conceived. I mean, she has repeatedly thumbed her nose at her duties. It's not a good look, but it's not a good look. But for a Kari Lake, is this a badge of honor?
I mean, I guess. I mean, she was doing what President Trump wanted her to do when he appointed her kind of to this position. And yeah, I mean, I think we've not seen any shortage of her, bad-mouthing judges and their rulings over other issues over the years. So, yeah, this could perhaps be seen as a badge of honor for her.
And those duties are ordered by Congress. This is something that came out of thin air.
Yeah, and this is something where you needed approval. That's what this ruling all came down to. That that Trump just didn't have the authority to put her in the way she did. There was no confirmation or anything like that. So we're kind of back to, I think, square one with this from where we were, a year ago.
So another setback for Kari Lake. Does it matter if she has a political future, whether it's in Iowa or Arizona? Does this kind of thing even matter within the MAGA crowd?
I don't think this specific thing matters at all. I mean, there are other things about Kari Lake, and there have been, rumors that she has had a fallout with the president, that they're not as close as they used to be. She's still very much a character in that world. Mm-hmm. And so in the right district at the right time, sure, Kari Lake can win.
All right, before we go, Mark, the Cesar Chavez story is it's a very troubling story in all ways here. New York Times investigating abuse, grooming of children, and it's just the horrible Dolores Huerta, who's just an icon in the farm workers movement and civil rights movement, had claims against him as well. It sounds like communities, states, governments, officials, they can't wait to take his name off of everything.
Yeah, it's moving really quickly, be it holidays or roads or schools or festivals or pretty much anything else that his parks that his name is on. Cities, states are really looking to remove his name. In some cases, just make it something else. In some cases, make it like more dedicated to the farm workers movement and sort of name it after the movement instead of the human. So it's been moving very quickly in that respect.
Yes, it is renaming the holiday. It sounds as though the governor is not even going to recognize Cesar Chavez Day on March 31st, going to call it something else, apparently.
Yeah, and I know in Phoenix, at least, they're changing it, I think, to Farm Workers Day.
Yeah.
And really what this comes down to is now you have to find a way to still celebrate the movement, celebrate the civil rights victories that were won, and separate it from the person who has been the face of it for decades. It's a very sad situation.
Yeah, can this be separated in terms of politics? Is there an impact here in terms of politics?
I'm not sure that there is, because the folks who a week ago would have defended Cesar Chavez to the death were very quick to condemn him, to lead, really not even to go along with it, but to kind of lead the push to start renaming things, to start taking his name off of things. Cesar Chavez High School in Levine looks like they're probably going to meet next week to start the process to change that. So there was no effort by previous supporters really to dig in their heels and say, whoa, hold on, wait a minute. They were very quick. And I think the fact that the United Farm Workers, the organization itself, that he was the face of for so much of his life, that they were the ones who kind of came out first before we even knew the full allegations, said, hey, we're changing this, we're canceling holidays, we're canceling marches. And I think a lot of people kind of followed that lead.
I think that Dolores Huerta, those incidents, I mean, that's tough to get by.
Yeah, that was heart-wrenching to read,
Yes.
and obviously, you correctly called her an icon. I mean, she was right there leading that movement for so many years also.
All right, we will end it there. Panel, good to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. That's it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great weekend.
When you want to be more adventurous, Arizona PBS delivers the wonders of the world, thanks to financial support from you and
Primavera Online School now offers kindergarten through 5th grade.